Hello, it's me, Matt, sitting in the woods. It's so quiet here. You don't even wanna talk, but I am going to be the weirdo sitting in the tree, talking to nobody about nothing for the next couple of minutes, I guess. There's a pathway like next to me. There's barely anyone around, but still, there's probably gonna be somebody around. Anyway, it's the 1st of January 2023. Happy New Year, I guess. Whatever. May this year be better for all of us. And I've already finished a book, I guess. I've been nudging away at it for like a year and a half with like breaks in between. Forever ago, I think in 2021. I talked about this before. Afghanistan by Thomas Barfield. A cultural and political history. All the way back then, I said that the whole like Middle East is kind of like a blank spot in my education. And so I decided to change that a bit. Even more so with current news about the Taliban takeover that started in 2021 when I started reading the book as well. So that inflamed that want to learn about that part of the world even more. But yeah, I'm glad I read this book now because it really gave me a proper perspective, I feel like, on the country, at least as at a first glimpse, because I was never too aware of what actually was going on around there. Especially the little that I do know or heard of was always from the perspective of the Western media. So this still is written by an American scholar, I guess, for lack of a better word, that studied the country and its culture and its history for most of his life, I believe. Thomas Barfield is one of the leading professors, or like one of the leading scholars in the world, as far as I know, about Afghanistan. And he doesn't, from reading this, he doesn't seem to have like a skewed American perspective on it or anything. It seems very much that he is actually an appreciator of its culture and its history, and he's more or less neutral, partially even like in favor of Afghanistan. It's not a one-sided thing, which I was a little bit afraid of at first, reading that it's written by an American, because you know that the US and Afghanistan relationship is the best, I guess. And I've been hacking away at this book for so incredibly long, with big chunks of breaks, because while it was very interesting, it's also incredibly dense with information. It is a pretty thick book as well, with 400 pages, and the font, the text is pretty small and really packed with information, because it generally where was I? Yeah, I'm the fucking weirdo sitting in the woods talking to the woodland critters about Afghanistan. Like, I was trying to say that this book is so dense with information because it generally goes through basically the entire history of the country, starting from the Middle Ages pretty much until like the early 2000s. So there's a lot of ground to cover, and he does it pretty damn thoroughly. So obviously there's no way I could, or anybody could, retain all the information on the first read. This seems to be like a book to actually study if you want to properly learn about the country. It's not just an entertainment read. But for me, as a first touching ground with the country on an educational level, this was definitely something that I valued. There were a lot of interesting people mentioned in this book too that I actually genuinely want to read more about. I see people. I don't think they have noticed me yet. I also already planned on reading more Afghan literature. Once I'm out of the woods over here, in the next few days, I'm gonna be picking up some books from the public library that I ordered. This was like the first glimpse, getting a grasp of the country, getting a first perspective on it. Now I actually wanna pinpoint a bit of its culture, especially because this is called a cultural and political history, but it is honestly mostly about the political side. I feel like I'm missing a bit of the cultural aspect of the country, so I want to focus on that next. I'm gonna be talking about this in the rest of the video probably because I'm reading it this month at some point. I already plan to read a translated book of poetry from a domestically famous, at least, Afghan poet. I'm also looking at a picture book about Afghan culture, about its architecture and stuff, so I can get a bit of a visual feel as well. This was probably my slowest read in years, in terms of time spent on each page. But that's for a reason. Even more so because of that. I'm pretty proud that I've stuck with it, because for a while, the months that I haven't touched the book at all because I didn't feel like having the brain power for it or whatever, there was points where I thought I would never be able to return to this book, but I'm very happy I did. I managed to get through it. I enjoyed it too. I'm glad I learned a bit about the country, and I'm glad that it put me on a track to learn even more about the country. Yeah, and fill that gap in my education about the Middle East a bit. I read the last 30 pages or so today on the 1st of January, the first of the year. So I guess I already got one book down for my reading challenge of 2023, which I probably already said this before, I'm gonna stick that to 10 books again and just see what happens, just like previously. But yeah, I guess I already got one book down for that on the list, checked off, even though that almost all of the reading of this book happened in the previous 2 years. But that's how it goes, finished it this year. 2 more books, which are gonna be way quicker reads, about Afghanistan are gonna follow up. The poetry book isn't thick, and the picture book is photography mostly. So it's not gonna be a long read. Very curious about both of those though. Yeah, that's probably the next 2 books that I'm gonna be talking about, but that won't be in the woods. This is a one-time thing. Bye-bye. What's up? How's it going? We're back home in Jerkle, Maine. Met Jerkle here fresh out the shower. This is the next installment, doing a quick one. Because I have to go soon, do a thing. Like I said, in the woods, I had some more reading planned in regards to Afghanistan, which were both of them very quick reads. So we're now, it's now the 14th of January. We are 2 weeks past the previous clip, and I finished those 2 books as well. Which, another tangent, I renewed my library card, which I did to get these 2 books. Honestly, I used to be an avid library visitor back in the day. I used to read a lot of books from there, went there in my free time just to sit a little and chill. But that's been a few years ago now, because my reading habits completely changed since then. I read ebooks now mostly, most of which I'll get online easily. And the few books that I wanted to read that I couldn't get digitally, I bought used online. So that was my 2 sources that I needed, and I was well done. But there's still the tiny margin, the tiny amount of books that I would like to read that are neither digitally available, nor are they available used for a decent price. Including both of these 2 books now, which even used, they are way too expensive for my kind of budget. So it was these books that kind of led me to renew my library card, which lets me, for a small fee, get these books from libraries around the country. Both of these books are not from my local library. They were imported from libraries somewhere else in Germany. And it's just great that that's an option, and I was able to read these 2. Okay, so I started this first, and it's a chonker, because this isn't a textbook. Afghanistan by Jaroslav Poncar. Jaroslav Poncar, a photographer, because this is a collection of photography. Like I said in the woods, I wanted to now learn more about the cultural aspect of the country after I've read Thomas Barfield's book that mostly dealt with the historical and political side of the thing. So this gave me a proper insight into the country's more cultural aspects, which is what I really wanted, and it's a very, very nice photography book as well. Jaroslav Poncar is a photographer, mostly like doing travel photography, I think. From what I gathered, he is prolific enough that he was even asked to document Afghan culture for local historical organizations that want to document the culture of the country. But it is also very clear that Jaroslav Poncar genuinely appreciates and loves the culture of Afghanistan and like isn't just doing this as a job. There are short introductory texts for the book in general at the beginning, and then for each location of the country that the chapters are about. And judging from the text and his experience getting a lot of these pictures, he willingly traveled across safety precautions because he wanted, out of his own will, to document parts of the country that he himself appreciated a lot of which were probably never properly documented in a visual way before. And the photography that is in this book is genuinely great. Both the architectural side of the country, which like that also spans a huge spectrum from the elaborate like mosques with the huge like the cover art, which is one of my favorite pictures anyway, the blue mosque in Herat, which is like a huge extravagant building filled with these artistic little tiles individually placed, and it looks amazing. In contrast to that, the small rural villages with the homes of the people built of like literal mud bricks set in front of the background of like huge mountains and valleys. Like there's a lot of like amazing like visuals, vistas, honestly, in both the extravagant architecture and then the rural common man architecture. With that comes also the candid photography of just the people living in there, which is always a fucking amazing thing to see, in my opinion, because these are people you will never meet. These are living lives that you will never know anything about, and that are very different from you. And it's really cool to me to see pictures like this that just give you a tiny glimpse of these people that you share the planet with, but you don't know anything about personally. You got the architecture, you got the people, and you got the landscapes. Like I said, the huge, like the mountainsides, the valleys, even the rubble left behind by centuries of international and national conflict. But it doesn't, which I like, it doesn't focus on that in that way per se, because a lot of media, especially Western media about Afghanistan, are focusing on and portraying the country as like this country of conflict, because that is its historical relevancy outside of the country, I guess. But there's so much culture there that many living outside of the country probably have no idea about, because that's just not what the media portrays, and the country is probably not many people's first idea to look at for international like educational inspiration or whatever when it comes to like culture or whatever, for lack of a better way to phrase it. So for me it's super interesting to see these cultural aspects of this country that I, like I said, previously knew barely anything about, and that is mostly talked about in terms of its rough history and not much else. So the cultural aspect of the country and its people is very often left aside in media, and also has suffered a lot of loss throughout history, which makes it even more like interesting, amazing, and valuable to have these documents now, these visual documents, these photographies in this case, that actually capture them and hold them for the future for people around the world to look at. It's just an amazing thing, I think. And this photography book was a very visually beautiful and interesting book, and also very nicely presented with the introductory texts by the person that did travel the country to take these pictures, which seems like an interesting person in itself. And that was a nice little like read, I guess. And then going from the visual cultural aspect of my Afghan reading journey, I guess, whatever, comes this little red book, which holds the Quatrains of Khalilullah Khalili, I think I pronounced it right, which is one of the most like prominent or infamous Afghan poets or writers in general, probably. Also a professor, a scholar, working in at a university at the time. He's not alive anymore, but he was alive when this book was translated, which is very cool. Huge parts of the country, like all the rural parts outside of the big cities like Kabul, have very low literacy levels, although there is a solid amount of Afghan literature written throughout the centuries. So it's not like the country didn't have education and doesn't have a legacy of its own in literature. But again, most of the country is very rural and has a low literacy aspect. Plus there's the cultural significance of oral exchange of stories and knowledge. Having poetry of an Afghan poet in itself in written form is like not as super common as you might think. And then also having it translate into a language that I understand is also nothing that happens super often. So super interesting that I even was able to get this from my position. Poetry isn't something that translates well. Makes sense. Poetry heavily based on the country, it's on the language it's written in. So I already had that in mind going in. But the poet Khalilullah Khalili was actually still alive when this was translated, so I have pretty good hopes that he actually had a hand in the translations and actually had some power over how much was lost in translation. Every text is presented in 3 languages, and it's all quatrains, which means it's like 4 lines for each text. Each poem has 4 lines. That's a quatrain. Again, super interesting glimpse into the culture of this country that I'm super grateful for, and also some genuinely nice poems in here that I actually liked personally. A lot of these poems are about life, love, death, and time, as in aging mostly. And so it speaks about themes like how we are all the same in death, and how we need to enjoy our life to use it properly in that sense. Also some commentary, I guess social commentary on people that misuse their power. A lot of these kind of themes. And there are a few that I really like. There's one in particular about the subject of death and how we are all the same in it, that at least the translation phrases it the way that at the end of our life, when we are dead, we become the servants of the worms because they feed on our corpse. And I really like that visual and that idea and that concept. That strikes my bug-loving heart. Not enough bugs in poetry anyway, if you ask me. So this was a really nice find. And also, there's this one poem in here where Khalilullah Khalili basically says breaking the law is fun, go do it, which which was just really funny. The law may bring about 1,000 advantages. It may bring the people peace and relief, but you have to follow the course of lovers to discover that its violation brings another joy. It's wasn't what I've expected going into this Afghan poetry book. But yeah, there's some good stuff in here. I'm glad I was able to read this without fucking spending $60 on it or whatever. And yeah, those two books were both quick glimpses into Afghan culture. Very interesting glimpses into the culture, and that's what I've been reading since the beginning of the year. And I'm reading more right now, which I mean, you're probably gonna see me talk about it once this scene ends, you're gonna see me talk about this probably. I'm reading Earth and Ashes now by Atiq Rahimi, which is a contemporary Afghan writer who wrote some internationally acknowledged novels. This is a short novel, a novella, I guess. But yeah, I'm gonna be talking about this in a second anyway. That's my current book. And yeah, looking at the time, I gotta go. I gotta go outside into the rain. I mean, I don't have to, but I want to. Now that I'm done with these two books, get them back to the library. Maybe pick up something new, I'm not sure yet. See you in a second, in the next part of this video. Bye-bye. I drank so much tea, man. Gotta take a leak first. Y'all. Okie doke. I'm empty. Bladder emptied successfully. You dig? Alright. We're gonna be talking a bit more about Afghanistan, so let's move ahead quickly to that. Yesterday, when I recorded the last clip at the window, I was already saying that I was reading Earth and Ashes by Atiq Rahimi, and that it was a short novel, a novella I guess you could say, and that I was gonna be talking about this in the next clip you'll see, which is now. I have finished the little novel, the little book. It's done, and I liked it quite a lot, to say the least. Like I said, Atiq Rahimi is a contemporary Afghan writer, an author, still alive, still well and good. He wrote a bunch of award-winning books as well. I think most notably The Patience Stone. I think that's the title. You know what, let me check before I make a fool out of myself. There he is. And it was the Stone of Patience. The Patience Stone. Yeah. There's the movie version, but he wrote the book as well. Singuis Sabois, 2008. Yeah, that's the one. So, Atiq Rahimi, born in Kabul, Afghanistan, and fled the country during the Soviet invasion, which is important to note because this book, this novella, this Earth and Ashes that he wrote, is set during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. So already there's obvious emotional authenticity to this story. That's probably one of the things that make it so engaging. Earth and Ashes is a rather short story about a man trying to see his son to tell him about the tragic news that their family was killed in the events of the Soviet invasion. So it is about the journey of him, heavily focused on his processing of this sorrow and sadness and depression, and preparing mentally to confront his son. There's not much else going on. There's only a sparse amount of characters, but honestly all of those characters are very interesting and seem very humanly written. Like, even though barely any of the characters here are saying too much because it's such a short story, they still feel very much like real and rounded for what they are. And I was genuinely interested in their perspectives on lives. And it is the different perspectives on sorrow specifically that honestly make up most of this book. That is the theme, how to deal with sorrow and emotional trauma, I guess you could say. With tragedy, with death, how to deal with that. All set in front of the background of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. And the historical event that the author was actually affected by. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. It is well written. It is very engaging. It has good, like, interesting characters. Not much to say here, but I enjoyed this a lot, and I recommend this as well. If you are curious, maybe because of this video about Afghan literature in some way, and you are in the mood for like a quick read, pick up Earth and Ashes. It's good, it's short, but it has good depth to it. I feel like I really like this, and I do want to read more texts of this author. I'm probably gonna read The Patient Stone at some point, maybe not this year, but I am interested in that book, and it is on my to be read list now. With that, we're finally moving on from all my Afghan talk, I guess. I think this was my tiny little Afghan journey for now, as part of this video. These were the 4 books I've read about Afghanistan now, but now we're gonna move on to something completely different. So if you have been sick of me talking about the Middle East, you're gonna get something else now. Because while I was reading all these Afghan things, I did actually also read one other novel that has nothing to do with all of that. Around the turn of the year, around New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, I was looking for another book that would fit the season, the winter season. We didn't really get any snow. I said this before, last year? No, 2 years ago. One of the most depressing things I've ever said on camera, I believe. Thanks to global warming and whatnot, we didn't have any snow here. So that's not a surprise. I already knew I had to go for fictional media to get that. And that is pretty much what I've done, what led me to read this. Ice by Anna Kavan. And I've never known anything about Anna Kavan before reading this book, but it makes sense that this book came out of this person. Now that I've read up a little bit about her actual real life afterwards, or like during reading of this book, I peeked at her Wikipedia page and stuff, and it answered a bunch of my questions, I guess. Ice by Anna Kavan is about a man, a nameless man. I think every single character in this book is nameless. It is about a nameless man looking for a woman that he has feelings for, because he feels like she needs protection from the world. It's all set basically during an apocalypse where like an invading wall of ice is taking over the entire world, freezing everything to death. And so everything is like cold, icy, frozen, snowy, and that's a very prominent theme in the language, in how it's written. There's beautiful, effective, great descriptions of all these icy, frozen landscapes, and how the characters are stumbling through the snow and fucking trying to get from point A to point B during these harsh conditions. You can feel the cold reading this book, I feel like. Like, that was one of my highlights during this read. But that is not the main theme or subject of this, because what this book is actually about, from what I gathered at least, maybe I'm completely wrong in what I'm gonna be talking about here, my general impression was that this book is about abuse, specifically like domestic abuse, physical abuse, and the relationship between victim and perpetrator, kind of. Also, kind of a little bit in general about the role of a man in a woman's life, I feel like. Maybe, I don't know how much of that was intentional, though I could see there being intentional sparks like that. Seeing that, from what I've gathered at least, I'm not like an expert or whatever, but from what I've read, the author Anna Kavan has had a history of abuse herself that she experienced. So I think there's some threads coming from her real life experiences that come over in this book, or like her real life experience inspired this book, something like that. I'm not familiar enough with the author to actually make like specific claims, but that's what it feels like to me. An important thing to say about this book is that it's a slipstream novel, is what it's called. This book helped popularize that subgenre, or that like style of writing. A slipstream novel or slipstream story is it means that the text is basically written like a dream, where things don't always have to make chronological sense, and where different situations can interweave into each other without much questioning of it. Things just flow like a train of thought from one thing to another. It doesn't necessarily have to be realistic or reliable. The narrator, the main character, the man that you follow, isn't a reliable main character either. He suffers, for lack of a better word, from hallucinations, I guess, which is never like specifically said, but you just get the feeling because it happens from time to time that there are situations described that have no relation to the sentence before, or like are completely glanced over afterwards when something else happens. Sometimes there's different versions of the same situation described, and you just have to assume one of them happened for real and one not. I had a bit of trouble getting into this at the beginning. That's also because I had to get used to this writing style. But once I consciously got into this book, taking it as a dream, where things happen without being questioned, in a sort of a continuous vibe more than it is a continuous plot-focused story, that's when it clicked with me, and that's when it started to work. Once you read it... Nice. Okay. Once you read it like a fever dream, you can get lost in it pretty well. I think that's a good way to phrase it. And that's where it works best, is that the book isn't much of a plot, it is a vibe. It's not that much of a story, it is a dream, more or less a nightmare, with a lot of ambiguous question marks. The main character became more despicable the longer the book went on. I'm not sure how much of... Again, I think I can say this about everything. I'm not sure how much of all the things that I got from this book were intentional. I can only tell you about my own experience with the book, and the main character became more despicable the longer the story went on, because it starts off being set up like this dude wants to genuinely rescue or help this woman that's stuck in abusive relationships left and right, and desperately seeks for her, and that's his entire mission in life before the whole world freezes over. But then the more time you spend with this dude, the more you realize he has his own problems and strange sparks of abusive behavior. I'm gonna stay as vague as possible, but the further we get to the end, it does lead up sort of to him not being the savior that he thinks he is. And to me, this whole thing read as a commentary on, I guess, victim and perpetrator relationships, in that it's, to me, pretty much said that it is about how the victim becomes the victim because the victim role is pushed on them by people that are convinced that this person needs the help. Even a person acting in good faith, trying to help, support, or defend a person, might be actually counteractive by taking away somebody's own agency and that way perpetually putting them in the victim role. I don't know if I'm making myself clear, because I'm struggling a bit to put this into words. I think I put this into words better when I wrote it down. I actually write a review of sorts on Goodreads and Storygraph, so that's always where the more better structured reviews are. Let me just quote myself from my written review, I guess. The story read to me as being about how the entitlement to be the savior of someone else can become abusive by taking away that person's own agency to live their own life. The more the protagonist felt like the nameless woman needed his help to survive and be safe, the less that woman strived, which in turn fed his blind rage. The victim becomes the victim by having that role pushed on her by people that are convinced she needs protection, and don't realize their forceful imposition and pitying is actually what enables that misery. I hope that makes it clear what I mean. That's what I took away from it. This perspective on a potential abuse relationship. And that's what was really interesting to me at the end. Plus the beautiful, genuinely beautiful, descriptions and metaphorical use of the ice and snow. It was a very seasonal read in that way, although also quite depressing. And although this is the most critically acclaimed or most popular text Anna Kavan ever wrote, I am interested to try out something else that she wrote at some point. While the creeping night settled in my apartment, I guess that's it for me for now. There's one more thing I guess I can mention. Like I said in the last clip, after finishing my talk at the window, I went to the library to give back the books that I was talking about. I walked through the rain, I stepped through the puddles, and I dodged the raindrops and put the books back where they belong, in the library, and also got myself a new book. A mostly spontaneous pick for my next read, and I picked this one up. This is a German novel, Dunkle Gesellschaft, Roman in 10 Regennächten by Gert Loschütz, which I believe there is an English translation of this as well, which is like The Dark Society, a novel in 10 rainy nights. That's pretty much what this means. And obviously I was kind of inspired to grab this off the library shelf after walking through the rain yesterday. I felt that was fitting. Unfortunately, it's not raining anymore. I got my hopes up that we get some more rain in the next few days, so I can start reading this with the proper vibe outside my window. Haven't started it yet. Looking forward to it though. Although I barely know, I know nothing about the author, and I know not really much about the plot, but I'm always down for rainy stories. And it's been a long time since I read a German book. I guess it's about time to read something in my native language for once. But yeah, that's gonna be probably the thing that I'm gonna be talking about next. Now, I kind of fucked up the timing, I guess, because it didn't rain even once over the days that I read this supposedly rainy book. We're back at the window. This time it's less cinematic though. because I feel like that's actually appropriate now that I think about it. Okay, so let's get down to business. Now I did walk through that rain to grab a little booksy. That book is still here. Probably gonna be my final finished read for January, so this is probably gonna be the last book I'm gonna be talking about this video, this vlog, this update. And we're not ending on a banger here. It's kinda ironic. When I read the book Ice by Anna Kavan that I talked about, I read it partially because I wanted to get that icy, snowy vibe for my winter seasonal reading, because I knew that I wouldn't really get that in real life much. And while I was reading that book, Ice, it was raining a lot. Now, on one of the rainiest days this season, I went to go to the library and picked this book up, titled Dark Society, a novel in 10 rainy nights by German author Gert Loschütz. And I read it over the course of 10 days, and in those 10 days, it didn't rain once, but we had a pretty good snowfall, all things considered. There was actually some snow lying on the ground for a day instead of melting immediately, which was quite astounding, if I may say so. Also, I just realized that a second ago before I started this video. This book is a novel in 10 rainy nights, and I did read this over the course of 10 days exactly, which is kind of funny, but none of mine have been rainy, which is a shame. And kind of a disappointment, kind of a letdown that also is fitting for the book itself, this novel, because I didn't quite like it. Now, this is probably the first German book that I've read in possibly a year. I don't think I've read a single German book since I read the German translation of Edward Levé's Suicide at the beginning of 2022, so pretty much exactly 1 year ago. So this was a return to my native language, I guess. I thought it would be nice because I've been neglecting that, I guess. Most of what I read is English, and I kind of immediately regretted it because there are books with amazing openers. There are iconic first lines. And then you have shit like this, my return to German literature, and it's literally like a joke because of the first page. It's literally one sentence, the entire first page. I read this, I groaned, I rolled my eyes, and I almost put the book back. Such a rough, ironic start to reading German again. It's just this incredibly endless what is it called in English? In German you say Schachtelsatz, which is just a sentence that's like made up of like in 100 different smaller sentences without like ever putting a stop to it. There's an English translation for that term. I can't think of it right now. Yeah, there are texts that use incredibly long, convoluted sentences on purpose very well to a positive effect, but this is not it. Reading this book felt like sitting down with like your friend's boomer dad who just tells you his mundane life stories in excruciating detail without ever getting to a point. That's what this felt like. I can't even really say what this was actually about or what the point of this was. This is structured in 10 chapters, each of them, I guess, containing one of the rainy nights, although none of them really have a connection. It's, I guess, in the broadest sense, an anthology story with vague or ambiguous connections between them. it really does feel like this dude is just like remembering random parts of his life and telling you them, but they are rarely actually interesting without ever actually getting to a point, and it's just tiring, I guess. There were a few interesting chapters, one of which, I think the most interesting chapter for me was one where he was somewhere in the US and he was somehow, he ended up in some sort of cult because they thought he was like a person of meaning for them or something, while he didn't know what the fuck was about. That was kind of interesting, although again it kind of just ends and it doesn't really lead to anything for the greater scheme of things. There are a few other moments that were kind of interesting or even well written. Every now and then there was a moment that was kind of nice. There's a moment near the end in one of the last chapters where a town is just flooded with sewer water, with the walls of the houses caked with stinky mud and shit. It was kind of funny, I guess. It was kind of nice. Sometimes the author describes the like cold, wet, dreary German landscapes of the locations pretty well, so that has a bit of a vibe to it. But from a like narration standpoint, a writing style, and like plot, this was a bummer. This was a flop. I finished this because it wasn't painful to read. It did have its moments, like the one or two chapters that I actually kind of liked, plus the occasional moment that was decently written. But most of this book was just mundane run-on sentences with way too much information that didn't like really pertain any point or like have any reason to be there, just to, I think this was purposefully written in a colloquial way to emulate how one might talk in a face-to-face conversation, but it didn't, and I get that idea. I think it can work for sure, but I don't think it translated well to the page here, and it just became this rather annoying way to tell this already not very interesting story. Really not much here. So yeah, this return to German literature was kind of a dud. a smidge below mediocre. Right? That's really it. But there you have it. That's my January, which, good gosh dang in heaven, my guy, there was quite a lot of books. Granted, obviously they weren't all like textbooks or like long or whatever, but a book is a book. I did get through quite a lot of books this January. Was this my sixth book? When it comes down to the bare numbers, quite the head start on my yearly reading challenge. So who knows what the rest of the year is actually gonna look like. But yeah, this was actually a really nice month for me in terms of reading. A lot of variety, a lot of interesting stuff. But yeah, that's it. Home dogs. Thanks for watching. That was the January reading update for 2023, if you know what I'm saying.